about to save these people. I done saved one.
One just jumped out.
Harrison County Inn. A quiet summer week in southern Indiana was violently interrupted when an atmospheric anomaly dumped an unprecedented deluge of rain on Harrison County. Over a span of less than 4 hours, the small towns of Lanesville and Corydon were submerged by historic flash flooding, transforming everyday suburban neighborhoods into rushing rivers, trapping residents on their rooftops, and triggering a massive multi-jurisdictional emergency response. According to regional meteorological stations and the National Weather Service (NWS) in Louisville, localized rainfall totals skyrocketed to between 6 and 9 inches in a staggeringly brief window. The sudden onslaught completely overwhelmed local infrastructure, causing small creeks to morph into violent torrents, structurally compromising local bridges, displacing hazardous chemical tanks, and forcing hundreds of residents to flee for their lives. The disaster began when a slow-moving, moisture-rich convective weather system stalled directly over Harrison County. Fed by a persistent corridor of warm, unstable air from the Gulf of Mexico, the storm cells engaged in what meteorologists call training, a dangerous phenomenon where multiple severe thunderstorms continuously move over the exact same geographic corridor like cars on a train track. Meanwhile, neighboring counties experienced a manageable 2 to 4 inches of rain. The epicenter of the cloudburst stalled directly over the Lanesville-Corydon corridor. Lanesville area received a staggering 8+ inches of rain in approximately 3 hours. Topographical vulnerability. The regional topography, defined by karst landscapes, rolling hills, and steep limestone valleys, offer no natural buffer. The parched summer ground quickly hit its saturation limit within the first 30 minutes. Runoff shockwave. Unable to absorb the moisture, millions of gallons of water immediately cascaded down the hillsides, channeling directly into the local stream systems. Lanesville bore the initial, most violent brunt of the flash flood. By mid-afternoon, what began as heavy puddle accumulation on lawns transformed into an apocalyptic scene. Local waterways, most notably the usually quiet creeks running past the high school and residential blocks, swelled past their banks within minutes. The water was rising so rapidly it defied belief, reported Highland Fire Protection District firefighter Ryan Houchin, a veteran first responder with nearly 30 years of local service. I've been through a lot of floods in our area over 3 decades. This is the first time I've ever seen flash flooding escalate with this level of sheer violence. It was a complete shock to the system. For residents like Renea Clark, who was tending to an elderly community member at the time, the disaster materialized with a terrifying roar. A massive retaining wall right outside the house just collapsed under the pressure of the rushing water, Clark recalled, visibly shaken. I looked outside, and my car was already halfway submerged. The local creek didn't look like a creek anymore. It looked like a massive, raging river flowing right past the high school. It was absolute chaos for hours. As water lines breached the first stories of homes along Main Street and St. John's Church Road, downtown Lanesville was entirely cut off. Lanesville Fire Chief Mike Walter officially declared a state of emergency, issuing urgent evacuation orders. However, for many, ground escape routes were erased before they could step out of their front doors. Dozens of residents were forced to retreat to their second floors and eventually onto their rooftops, waiting out the storm as muddy water swirled around their eaves. Submerged electrical infrastructure. Main power lines snapped under the weight of falling trees and rushing debris, sinking live high-voltage currents directly into the floodwaters. Floating missile hazards. The torrent unmoored several massive 500-gallon liquid propane tanks from commercial and residential properties. These heavy metal structures floated like naval mines through suburban streets, some actively leaking highly flammable gas into the damp air, creating a logistical nightmare for rescue teams. As the storm cell slightly shifted, the immense volume of water collected in Lanesville began moving down gradient. Gravity steered the flash flood directly toward the historic town of Corydon, Indiana's first state capital. The primary vector for this transition was Little Indian Creek, a waterway that winds its way westward from Lanesville straight into the heart of downtown Corydon. Already bloated to capacity, the creek acted as a superhighway for the floodwaters. By 2:30 p.m., Harrison County Dispatch began receiving frantic calls as water rapidly spilled over State Road 62 at the Floyd County border. Within an hour, rising waters swamped the intersection of Chestnut Street and Capitol Avenue in Corydon. Local police departments took the unprecedented step of systematically closing all entrances to downtown Corydon. Emergency checkpoints turned away all incoming traffic as authorities warned civilians that driving into the area was a threat to survival. Watching the historic streets vanish under an uncharacteristic layer of brown, debris-laden water, 10-year-old Corydon resident Emma Jones captured the community's collective disbelief in a simple statement: "It's crazy. It's just completely crazy." With Harrison County transformed into a fragmented archipelago of isolated high grounds, emergency dispatchers were inundated with hundreds of calls for assistance. The Ramsey Fire Department reported multiple overlapping emergencies occurring simultaneously across the county, stretching local resources to their absolute limits. Realizing the sheer scale of the crisis, the Harrison County Emergency Management Agency, EMA, activated regional mutual aid agreements. First responders from multiple surrounding counties mobilized immediately, arriving with specialized flat-bottomed rescue boats, jet skis, and high-water evacuation vehicles. Teams systematically navigated the treacherous, debris-strewn waters of Lanesville and Corydon. Rescuers waded chest-deep through strong currents to pull stranded individuals from vehicle roofs, porch awnings, and residential attics. They dodged the floating propane tanks and negotiated around half-submerged fences to transport vulnerable citizens to designated high-ground triage zones. Despite the terrifying volatility of the afternoon, Harrison County EMA director and local fire chiefs confirmed a near-miraculous statistic. No severe injuries or fatalities were reported. The swift, decisive action of first responders, combined with the resilience of neighbors helping neighbors, kept the human toll to zero. By late evening, the catastrophic storm cells finally broke apart, allowing the relentless water levels to start receding. However, as the mud-soaked streets of Lanesville and Corydon emerged from the torrent, the true stark scale of the physical devastation became undeniable. Even as the surface water vanished back into the creek beds, a secondary public health crisis emerged. The violent flooding had breached local water treatment and distribution networks, severely compromising the safety of the municipal water supply. On Wednesday morning, Harrison County Emergency Management issued an urgent, mandatory 72-hour boil water advisory for all residents of Lanesville and any rural customers serviced by Lanesville Water. With the immediate danger past, Harrison County authorities have transitioned from active rescue operations to the grueling process of damage assessment and recovery. Joint damage assessment teams are moving systematically through the street grids of both Lanesville and Corydon, documenting structural losses to help qualify the region for state and federal disaster relief funds. Local volunteer networks, church groups, and neighbors have already begun the massive cleanup effort. Shovels, mud pumps, and heavy machinery are now the dominant sights and sounds in a region that just days prior was a peaceful haven. While the physical scars on homes, bridges, and businesses will take months, if not years, and millions of dollars to fully heal, the spirit of Harrison County remains entirely unyielding. The historic towns of Lanesville and Corydon have withstood centuries of challenges along the hills of southern Indiana, and local leaders emphasize that they will rebuild from this historic deluge stronger, more unified, and better prepared for the volatile weather patterns of the future.